Initially, I was going to go to Japan. I was lined up for a job in Japan, and then I found out that I had to cut my hair. You don't convey that what you do now will lock you in for life, because that's what I was told, which was absolute garbage. You know, the decisions you make now will affect you forever. Well, yeah, some of them, but plenty of them won't.
We've got to do it. G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your host, Rob Licky, and we're coming to you today from Ngunnawal country in Canberra. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Ian Ed, CEO of English Australia. Thanks for joining me on the podcast, Ian.
My pleasure. Sorry I didn't bring my hat.
For those of you who are watching the video, we just had a bit of a comical interaction. We were getting stuff here. I was like, oh, Ian, I've just got to grab my hat, because it's kind of like the brand mark. And of course, you can't put headphones over the top of the hat. So if you indulge me, mate, I might take my hat off and leave it over here on the side today. Great to have you here, mate. I'm looking forward to a bit of a conversation because I've obviously seen your name around the industry for many years and now CEO of English Australia. So keen to dive into the story, but maybe just to get us started, what's it like stepping into the big chair for an organisation like EA?
Oh, it was a whirlwind. I stepped in at a time when things were really, kicking off. And quite honestly, I didn't have time to reflect on the enormity of the gig, and I just hit the ground and I ran. I had been, in the background, I'd been on the board of English Australia on 2 separate stints of 3 years or so. I'd worked quite closely. Well, I worked with Sue when she was CEO, and then with Brett, I worked quite closely with Brett when I was on the board, and then as a consultant, I'd left the board and started a consulting firm and did that for 5 years. And for all those 5 years, I was on and off working with English Australia as a consultant. So I was always in the background, always across what was going on. So I was up to speed with all the ins and outs of what the issues were and where we were going, and I knew how the organisation worked really well. There's nothing quite like being in the hot seat, and I thought I'd worked hard before. I knew nothing. It's non-stop. I now reflect back on always being enormously impressed with Brett and enormously impressed with Sue, and now I look back and go, wow, I now get what they were, how amazing what they did was when I see how hard it is and how much you have to do.
Like the proverbial ducks on the water, where the legs are underneath, paddling
100%.
and paddling, but there is cool. I mean, the 2 extraordinary leaders in Australian international education, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think normally my imposter syndrome would have had my head explode with the concept of taking on the role after Brett. But as I say, it was on for young and old, and there was no time to think about myself. It was just work, get stuff done, find out what's going on, make sure members know what's going on, try and understand, try and voice the concerns of the sector, listen to members, tell Canberra what they're thinking. There was no time for any self-doubt, any pondering. It was just go, go, go.
Very tactically, when you're operating at that level, how do you manage the priorities there? Because obviously you've got so many things screaming at you at once. What's your method for deciding what makes it to the top? For those of you who are listening along and not watching, just like the shrug of the shoulders almost set it
Method.
all.
I like it. I appreciate the benefit of the doubt that you give me that I might have a method. It's look, in all seriousness, it's working out which fire is burning brighter today, which patient is going to bleed out on the table to start working on. There's very much a triage system of, what's next. Certainly there's times to take a deep breath and think strategically, but they're few and far between at the moment, to be honest. It's rolling with the punches, duck, weave, punch, duck, weave, punch.
It's funny, isn't it? I think sometimes people see, particularly when you're a junior and you look up at people who are managing organizations and you just think, oh yeah, most of the time they're just doing strategy work. But in fact, it's true, isn't it? Just getting that breathing space to do that blue sky thinking is actually much, much harder to get, than people realize.
Especially in a small organization, And English Australia is a small organization. We've got a small secretariat, smaller now than ever because, the sector's hit hard. So we take it too. And the fact that, that Sue and Brett built the foundation that they did with a small organization, and I've tried to keep up with what they've achieved. It takes, certainly there's prioritization and certainly there's strategic thinking, but there's not a lot of time to sit back and ponder and so on, especially right now. I mean, to be fair, I don't think that it's ever been as chaotic as it is now in terms of policy change, legislative change, instrument change, visa change. It's been insane. And it's been, close to 2 years of it. Doesn't look like it's slowing down. And yeah, you sort of have to just roll with it to an extent.
What do you reckon young Ian would have thought of where you are now?
Young Ian would not have recognised me at all. Would not have there was zero congruence to that journey. It was quite erratic, and it was sort of, for the first long period, there was never a time when I was going to be in a suit in an office doing those sorts of things.
What were you into?
Well, I've been in this sector for more than 25 years now. Before that, I did a bunch of roles, but mainly in marketing, advertising. I actually left my role as a journalist to become an English teacher. I was working in IT journalism. Bored as could be. I hated it with a passion and couldn't take it any longer. And, just happened to be talking to somebody who, and complaining about how bored I was. And she said, you should try being an English teacher. It's fun. I was 25 at the time. So thought, yeah, sounds interesting. Went and had a look. She let me come and watch one of her classes, and I checked it out. I thought, that looks like fun. I could do that. Next thing I knew, I was teaching in Barcelona in Spain. And then, taught in Europe for 3-4 years and never looked back. Came out of teaching into management and got back into the marketing side of things. And then, before I knew it, I was running colleges as a GM and then a CEO, and then running my own business as a consultant for 5 years. And along came a spider called COVID. And, one of my clients, thankfully, hired me when the consulting business was really, dead in the water. And back into Ellicos I came.
Yeah, wow. That was a big call as a 25-year-old to completely change track.
I was never really, I think I fell into marketing and fell into then, I can string a few words together. And so I thought, I'll write, and got into writing advertising and then marketing copy. And, one thing led to another, and thought, don't much like these, I'll try the next thing. Don't much like that, try the next thing. And then, it seemed like a bit of fun, a bit of an adventure. And initially I was going to go to Japan. I was lined up for a job in Japan. And then I found out that I had to cut my hair. So I was a long-haired, half hippie, half rock and roll kind of guy back in the day, and actually cut my hair for my first teaching job. I'd literally turned up in Spain, and this is how much I knew at the time. I turned up in Spain in the middle of summer, didn't know anything about anything, and didn't realize that half of Spain went on holidays in summer back then. And, I couldn't get a job. So I literally...
Oh, wow, so you just rocked up.
Mate, I finished my CELTA, which is the course that you do to become an English teacher, then got on a plane to Spain, got out at the airport, bought a translation dictionary in the airport, found a taxi out the front, got in, looked up the word for hostel, got him to take me to a hostel, and then I walked the street with a CV, knocking on doors, looking for a job. Went through Valencia first, and then travelled down south and went from town to town, couldn't get anything. Ended up bussing it back up to Barcelona.
And the bank account's going down and down and down.
The bank account was looking miserable. And I had this last-ditch effort with this job where went really well. Afterwards, they said, yeah, sorry, we can't. And I was like, wow, I'm out of cash. I'm going to have to call my dad and say, hey, mate, I suppose you could spring us some cash to find somewhere else to go and get a job. And it was that or... so I said... well, why not? I thought you liked me. I thought it was the interview went well, and they went, well, it's your long hair. We teach all corporates. So I said, so if I cut my hair, do I get the job? So off I went to the hairdresser and got a haircut.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that amazing? Like that moment that you just had this insight, like, and actually spoke up and said, hey guys, like, why?
Yeah.
Because if you hadn't said that, you would have walked out the room. They would have been like, "Oh, that's a shame. Like, he's a good kid. He would have been all right."
Yeah.
But and you never would have known. Like, who knows where you'd be now?
Who knows? Yeah, I could have been somewhere very, very different. So, and I think that's the story of my career. I've just stumbled across amazing people who've connected me with the next person, and I think you do the work when you get there, but there's a hell of a lot of luck.
The reason this comes to mind is, and this timestamps this recording, but it's first week of October. I won't say what year, but first week of October, HSC, like final Year 12 exams, are literally starting this week.
Yep, my boy's got his first test on Thursday.
Oh, wow. So how do you convey that message to a young person? How would you convey it? Like, just because we all know it. Once you're our age, right? You're just like, yeah, it's so organic. It's the door opens. You're lucky you walk through and everything. But when you're early in your career, you don't realise.
Yeah, look, I think part of it is the message that you don't convey as well. You don't convey that what you do now will lock you in for life, because that's what I was told, which was absolute garbage. The decisions you make now will affect you forever. Well, yeah, some of them, but plenty of them won't. And I think that was our parents' generation where, you got a job and you did that job for the next 30 years and 40 years, 50 years. That's gone. And so I think, it's helping people understand, and I have this conversation with my boy, both of my boys. You do what comes next. You do what your passion is, and, you find a way to make that work. You ride the wave, Sometimes the waves are terrible. Sometimes you get smashed. Other times it's sweet, and you've got to paddle. Not to drag out the analogy too long, but you've got to do the work. You got to do the work.
Surfing, so you just keep playing.
You got to do the work. You got to put in the hard yards and so on. But if you think there's going to be a nice, neat, straight line, I think you got another thing coming for you. I think that very few people will ever have that nice, straight line career journey anymore.
Yeah, and I almost think like the best careers aren't. The best careers have like left turn. Have some adversity, like even just you talking about your consulting job and running into COVID. Some people know this, but I was running my own company as well, like into COVID, travel business, like poof, goodbye. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so tell me about that moment for you, like when suddenly you're rolling to what's this thing over in Europe, and oh my God, hang on, and suddenly boom, like it's in your face. What was that like for you, that moment?
Yeah, look, I think it was that boom. It was initially I was like, come on, we've been through it before. And in Ellicos, we get rocked by all the waves. Most of them will sort of wash over the universities. They've got a long pipeline. They've got students in them for 3 years at a time. Sometimes longer because they're doing those pathway courses, the foundation and diplomas and so on. In Ellicos, they come and they go, a constant turnover. And so every hiccup that comes along has always hit our sector. So, yeah, when it kicked off, for me, it was like, well, we got through SARS, we got through MERS, which I don't think anyone else remembers.
It was very
brief. I don't even know how to say it. It was brief.
Little bit. Swine flu.
Swine flu. Yeah, there was so many along the way. And I just thought, oh, come on, it's just another one, until it wasn't. And then, my consulting business was working in international education. There was nothing. Consulting was over in a heartbeat. I think Ellicos was hit really hard, as we all know. But yeah, it was pretty rough.
Was there a moment you remember just sitting there, like, because I remember it vividly for me, just sitting there and just this sinking feeling in my stomach that like I'd been watching a dream, like I'd been in some sort of dream unfolding. And I remember sitting at my dining table one day after we'd closed our business and just realizing that, no, this is freaking reality. And the world is just running away, from what was reality just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, look, I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I think it was surely this can't last, surely this can't last, surely this can't last for quite a while until it was, okay, it's already lasted long enough that it's all done and dusted. And like, it was then, when do we get out of this and how do we respond? I had a little bit of work going in the background, but not a great deal and not enough to pay the bills and to keep it going. It was definitely, a world-changing moment. It certainly changed my world, but I think it changed the world. I don't think we'll go back to the way things were. I think it was one of those moments where while everything slowed down then, everything else accelerated massively because we had to dramatically change how we operate.
I guess it also changes the way you see the world, right? So when the shit really hits the fan, like you've almost got this reference point, this kind of big step where suddenly, boom, like you're facing massive adversity and you know you've been through that.
Yeah, and look, I think as well on the other side, there's the world's learnt a new trick. You know, the world's learnt that, hey, you can shut your borders. You can just close everything down. That was never an option any time in the past. And so we learned that we could do that, and it'll be much easier to do it next time. So for me, it was, you know, looking at international ed in particular, the English language sector in particular, and thinking, okay, we'll get through this and we'll come out the other side and the world will be a different place. But when's the next one? When do the borders get shut down again? And how do we deal with it next time? So I think that's another aspect that I think we are living in a different space now where we've learned, well, we can operate on Zoom, Teams and whatever. We can do all sorts of things without the borders being open. I think that it's one of those things that's always going to sit there just below the surface now for the sector. And I think that a lot of, particularly in the English language sector where it was hit very hard, I mean, within 6 months, businesses were basically going into hibernation because students were in and out, you know, in that time. I think it really has changed the face of things.
Thinking about that kind of long-term impact, what about for your kids? Like, because, you know, you've got a son who's just about to do end-of-year exams, so just counting back, so they would have been like year 7, just going into high school.
Yeah.
What do you think that generation is going to take away in terms of, like, not necessarily negative, but maybe positive as well?
Yeah, look, I think
the expectation to work from home, probably, yes.
Well, yeah, they've seen a massive shift. We grew up, or lots of people grew up, little kids, and they watch their parents go off to work, and they don't really get it. They don't really get why you do that. But ours have seen us do it from home, and they're like, well, why can't you just work from home? But I do think, I mean, for the international education sector right now, I think we're going to go through a generation of kids coming in, whether it's domestic or international, and particularly for international, because they do have much higher needs. They are sort of out of their normal social networks and comfort zones and so on, and often linguistically so. So when they have come now to Australia, those kids are the kids who had, 2, sometimes 3 years where they were locked away in the house. They didn't get part-time jobs. They weren't out, doing the things that kids do and learning, life skills and survival skills, and their parents were home with them. So heaps of them didn't learn to cook, didn't learn to do stuff for themselves, didn't learn how to do their own laundry. And so, these are the kids who are coming to our institutions now. They need a hell of a lot more support. And a concern I have when I look at the sector and the pressure that it's under is that pressure is leading to organizations always looking for how do we survive through this? What do we cut? And looking at the university scene where, there's a lot of universities who seem to be financially struggling. And you do worry about the impact of that on students. We're not a country that funds its universities particularly generously, effectively. And, the impact of that on the students, I mean, we talk a lot about the impact of it on the institutions, but the impact on students is significant, I think.
Yeah. Okay, this is going to feel like a complete left-hand turn, but I kind of want to go there because earlier in our conversation, you're sort of talking about being, the long-haired dude, super relaxed. But now I'm looking at you. You look sharp, man. Like you got a nice suit on, you got the vest, your hair's really well done, and you talk like the CEO of English Australia. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just trying to reconcile these two images. You know what I mean? Do you feel like at some point you changed, or has this just been sort of an incremental adaptation over time?
Oh, I think it's very much been an incremental adaptation over time. I think I have been enormously fortunate to have had amazing people around me who I could learn from, who I can try and emulate. And, I've mentioned them, Brett, Sue, I've got an amazing board of people who always sharing views in a way that makes me, refine the way I'm thinking or expressing things. I've got amazing colleagues in the advocacy space. We're here at AIEC and, whether it's Phil, whether it's Felix at ITECA, whether it's Peter Hendy at or his 2IC, James at AHIA.
AHIA, that's it.
I've learnt over the years to listen and to learn well. I've never been much good in a classroom, ironically, but I'm very attentive to people who are much better at doing what they do than I am and learning anything I can from them.
What's it like to work with a board? Maybe just to frame this a little bit more, I think people who are early, mid-career have never interacted in that way. It seemed like this really foreign concept. Like you've got an organization and it's got a board, like, and these people kind of, maybe they're elected, maybe they're appointed, and they have this kind of role, but it all seems kind of ephemeral, vague. So
look, I would say it's just like having a boss. Bosses come in all shapes and sizes. Some of them are wonderful. Some of them are terrifying. Some of them build you up. Some of them beat you down. Some of them will be your mentor and be the person that you can emulate. Others, it's like what not to do. I've seen similar things with boards over the many boards that I've interacted with over the last, 15 years. The board that we have quite a large board.
how many?
There's 13 on our board,
quite...
same as I'm having a
IEAA.
Yeah, same as IEAA. So it's quite a large board and it's quite varied. It's really a really representative board of the English language teaching sector in Australia. So that's great.
It's a lot of views to manage, though, isn't it? A lot of
it is, but I think over the years I've been involved in the board of English Australia or with the board of English Australia since 2012, and we've consistently had it's consistently been really supportive of the CEO, and it's hard to suggest that you wouldn't be supportive of people like Sue or Brett. They're amazing at their jobs, and as a board member to both of them, it was often we were just admiring how effective our CEO was. But yeah, I think that it's certainly more complex than just having a single employer, but it's also very different in that the CEO who reports to a board is often more expert in what they're doing than the board is. The board sort of helps them make sure that they're thinking through the right things and they're considering the right issues more than tells them what to decide.
Yeah, like a mirror with a lens, right? So you got the expertise in one particular area.
And look, I mean, I think for an organisation like English Australia, we have a board made up of people, and I used to be one of them, who run colleges. Running a college is not a advocacy association. It's not a member association. They're a completely different business model. And so while the board
it's fine.
The board has enormous expertise and experience in the sector, and they know what's important for members. They know what's important for the industry, and their collective views working together is like having the industry or the sector in the room with us, and sharing the concerns and the thoughts and the desires and the needs. So that brings that to the fore in your decision making. But when I was on the board, I was very conscious that I'd never run a member association. It's a different business model and it takes a different set of approaches and strategies and tactics to make it work.
As you're talking, it just sort of strikes me that it's almost like we need this in our own lives, like that 5 to 7 people that, have operated in whatever space that we operate in, that can give us that
100%
unfiltered feedback.
And that's why diversity in governance is so important. It's why you don't want a monoculture on your board. You don't want everyone from a similar background. You want different brains, different ways of thinking, different ways of expressing things, different issues and concerns and needs, but also different life experiences, because that is what you need to draw into a mix, work together, have the board work that as a team, and then that gets funneled through the CEO into action of some kind. That's how good governance should work. Often it isn't how governance works, but it's how good governance should work, sure.
If you had a personal board of directors of people in the industry, let's say like a couple of people.
Don't do that to me.
Yeah, who would be on your
don't
board
do
of
that to me.
directors?
Wow.
It's so hard, isn't it? I'm just thinking about the amazing... to me, Brett Blacker.
100%. I mean, as I say, Brett, I was on the board when we selected Brett as our new CEO. And I'll embarrass him now if he's listening, by saying, I remember turning to the person sitting next to me on the board that he gave his presentation and saying, when I grow up, I want to be just like that. Oh my God. It was so impressive. And he continued to operate at that level and beyond. He's someone that I worked closely with then, and who, when I left the board and started consulting, I spoke with him and said, listen, I'd love to be involved with some of your stuff, with the work that you're doing. And he just took me under his wing and got me involved. And, it was an amazing opportunity. And I certainly wouldn't be here without Brett Blacker, and he's incredibly generous too. Has continued to be there for me, pick up the phone and talk things through with me when there's a particularly challenging little conundrum going on. And, he would certainly be on that board, that's for sure.
Who else, mate? Who else?
I think the board that I've got right now, I've got some amazing people there. And I think that the board that I had before that, there were amazing people there. Over the years, I've worked with so many people. I think one of the things that I do well, if I can say that, is to notice the difference between each person and be able to sort of rely on certain strengths, certain things. And I've been incredibly fortunate to come across or be involved with and get the support of over the years, people with such an incredibly broad set of skills. And there are some people who you can ask a question to at that time when you need an answer now. And there are people who I can think of who can answer a question. They're incredibly fast and insightful, but they can just bang, make a decision. Others who are invaluable at that point when you need deep thinking and you need long thinking. You need to go through a process, because the process of solving the next step, solving the point that you want to get to, that long-term vision, requires a process, and the process has value in itself because it teaches you why you're not choosing the other thing so you don't second guess afterwards. So I think for me, that board would change all the time.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. As you're talking, I'm just thinking, it's almost like an exercise that you need to do once every couple of years, where you sit down and you sort of think through the people who are in your orbit, and you think about their skill sets and, almost methodically make a list of 20 people and the different places where, you could reach out to them. What I find is because when you're working with people, you inevitably, sorry, Lynn, tidy that up for me. You inevitably end up interacting with the same people over and over and over, which is a good thing, deepening relationships and, benefiting from their experience. But at the same time, sometimes maybe the perfect person to solve that problem is actually that person over there. But but you just don't think of it at the time because of the recency bias.
Yeah, and I think to an extent it's about keeping your ears open, keeping your eyes open. And there's a phrase that I learned somewhere along the line, ontological humility, which is that
ontological humility.
Yeah, it's just that thing of just not being fixed, that you have the right way of phrasing something, the right way of defining anything, the right piece of knowledge, being open to wherever it might come from. And so
it's called being a parent, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's that was actually where I was going as well, in that sometimes it's my kids. Sometimes it's not someone from the sector. Sometimes it's a talk at home. Sometimes it's watching a movie or listening to a song and a lyric really clicks and you go, that's the way I need to be thinking. And it's not necessarily what you need to be thinking, it's how you need to be thinking. And it might be taking a particular mindset to a problem.
Feels to me, mate, as you're talking, it feels to me like you've almost got this sensor that's just kind of operating in the background, right? That's just kind of looking for signals. Maybe that goes along with what you were saying with, being able to find the person that find their strengths and understand how you're able to work in with that. But it almost feels like you've got some sort of special radar that's sort of sitting there operating in the background,
Yeah, it certainly is true that I have 5, 6, 7, 8 tracks going at one time. I think it's called ADHD, quite literally. And yeah, you do have multiple tracks. You do have to keep thinking on multiple levels. And that's a big part of this job as well. You have to think about the personal interaction as well as the political. You have to think about how it might affect this member or that member, what it will mean this week versus next week, how it will affect offshore agents versus how it will affect onshore students. And there's always, lots of different ways of looking at any one thing.
Perhaps by way of wrapping up, to sort of close the circle on our journey. Dropping back into Europe, back when you were there teaching English and spending time across the continent, it's very different when you like live in a place compared to travel through it.
Yeah.
Is there a place there that really spoke to you? And it could maybe Spain, maybe somewhere else where you just walked in and it just, you felt the tingle and went, wow.
I would say I have felt that tingle in a number of places. Barcelona I loved, but I'd actually say that I really like difference. I like a bit of chaos. I like that point where you feel overwhelmed by the chaos and the challenge and working your way through it. I remember arriving in Ho Chi Minh City in Saigon in Vietnam and just being overwhelmed by, oh my God, how the hell does this place work? It took me quite some time to work out how to cross a road because it's a leap of faith. You just walk out between the traffic, but it's so different. And I love that. So I loved Vietnam. I loved places that I've been where they are dramatically different from where I come from. It enlivens the senses, and it makes you notice things that you take for granted every day. How to cross the road, how to line up for something, these banal things. And it makes you just rethink. And I love the concept of constantly rethinking and not taking a way of seeing things for granted as the only way to see things.
If you had a magic ticket to fly anywhere in the world, somewhere new that you haven't been, what's top of the list for you?
Oh.
No, like forget about life constraints, forget about money, anywhere at all. Direct ticket from, your street, landing in Mongolia or.
There's a long list, to be honest. There are so many places I'd love to go. I'd love to go to Portugal. I've never been to Portugal. Had a trip planned when I was in Spain to Morocco that I never made, and always regretted not going. I'd love to go back and travel through Southeast Asia again. I love Southeast Asia, and I loved Vietnam and traveled a lot on local transport and so on, and just met amazing people. It's a beautiful country. I'd love to get into the surrounds as well, and love to go to Cambodia and Laos and so on. Yeah.
I was going to wrap up there, but as you're talking, and this is going to seem like another left-hand turn, but I'm just too curious to get your take on it. Because as you're talking about these places and traveling, like such a human thing, traveling to foreign countries where you don't speak the language. But like we're sitting on the cusp of this technological revolution where essentially you put in an earpiece, you walk along with a microphone, and you almost don't need to speak a language anymore. Here I am sitting with the CEO of English Australia.
So I don't.
What's your view?
I don't get it. I don't believe it. For me, language, and I know that yes, it will be a percentage of people will stick the babblefish in their ear and quite happily be able to communicate in any language. And sure, there's benefits, but it's not the same. Language, I remember the moment I twigged so I arrived in Spain, didn't speak a word, literally bought a translation dictionary in the airport. By the time I left a year and a half later, was relatively fluent, pretty good level of Spanish and a pretty appalling level of Catalan. My apologies. But I remember a moment where I twigged that I was learning words and so on, and I was learning sentences, but when I watched people speak, it was different. Their shoulders worked differently. Their face worked differently. There's so many physical attributes. There's so much in the way you use tone, so much in the way you move your hands. It's not just words. When you're communicating with a person, it's like the difference between an email and a face-to-face meeting.
I love it.
There's no comparison. You can't do business purely via email. There's got to be a human contact. Otherwise, there's not much spice there. There's no life to it. Communication is human to human. Sure, technology will make it easier for those places where you've just arrived in, you mentioned it before, you've just arrived in Mongolia and you need dinner. Yes, fine. But if you want to actually do business in Mongolia, you need to learn. You need to be able to communicate. You need to know what to eat, how to eat it. You need to know what facial expressions work, where your eye contact goes, how to shake hands, do you hug? You need to know all these physical things that don't come from an AI or a translator, Whether one thing I love is watching how people use their faces to do things. In Colombia, they point with their lips. So when you want to show something across the room, they go, it's over there. And it was not until I was laughing about how unusual that was when I realized that we point with our chin.
Oh, yeah. Well, there you go.
There are so many things that until you start to watch this stuff, you don't realize that's there. And I think that as English speakers, we get quite
blasé.
Yeah, but also we just figure, well, everyone's going to speak English. And so we miss so much of it, And yeah, sure, we could interact with a babblefish, but what a loss of the richness of learning a language and learning how to think differently and act differently and shape yourself differently and express yourself differently. What a loss.
What a great way to finish, I think. I completely agree with you. Ian, Ed, thank you so much for joining me on Global Horizons.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all of the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garrigal Land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.